Hello everyone and welcome to episode 9 of Never Mind the Dam Busters with me, Jane Gulliford-Lowes, and my co-host James Jeffries. And by the time this episode airs on 17th of July, James and I will be preparing for our talks at this year's We Have Ways of Making You Talk Second World War History Festival. If you haven't been before, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's absolutely brilliant. 3 days of war waffle with top historians and a chance to mingle with like-minded people. This will be my 4th time. How many for you, James?
This is my first, actually.
Is it? Oh, you've got a treat in store then. Yeah.
But I can't wait. Yeah.
Well, it's the first time I'm going to be speaking, so I'm really looking forward to it, mainly because we get to mingle with the stars in the green room. But anyway, that's another issue. So I'm going to be talking about Bomber Command mine-laying operations, of course, my niche, and hopefully shattering a few myths. James, what about you? What are you going to be talking about?
I'm going to be talking about RAF Bomber Command's part in Overlord. So building on the pod we did a couple of weeks back, or
Excellent.
I can't work out actually when this comes out. Basically saying it was more than just bombing the beaches. I'm going to be mentioning mine laying. So you'll be happy about that. Transportation plan. I don't want to say any more. I don't want to give away any spoilers.
That's fair enough. That's absolutely fair enough. And what have you been up to lately?
I've been busy, very busy actually. I met up with my friend Ethan in London. He came over from America, and we went to the Imperial War Museum, showed him around. Also went to the RAF Museum, London at Hendon, which obviously is very familiar to me. I've also been getting back into model making. I've been working on a couple of airfix kits, which has been very, very therapeutic. It's a wonderful hobby. And I've just worked out, actually, when this goes out, I'll actually be in Cambridge, won't I? We're a month ahead of ourselves. I'll be teaching at Peterhouse College on a Second World War course. So what about yourself, Jane?
Get you. That's all very fancy, isn't it? Yeah. What about me? What have I been up to? I've been doing some more volunteering at the North East Land, Sea and Air Museum at Sunderland. And last weekend, I spent Sunday polishing a Hawker Hunter from 1956, as you do. But you have to bear in mind,
wonderful.
right, I'm not especially tall. So when it was finished, there was this sort of line of dust along the back, the bit that I couldn't reach. So I had to get someone else who was taller to come along and do that bit. But yeah, it looks superb. Only another 25 aircraft to go. And I think we're going to be doing the Vampire next, which is not quite high. So I might manage that one a bit better. Yeah. So really looking forward to that. So anyway, James, do you want to introduce our guests today?
Yes, I'm very excited about this. We're joined by Dr. Megan Kelleher and Rab Cooper. Both work at the RAF Midlands Museum, a former RAF Cosford. I met both of them earlier in the year when I gave a talk there about the RAF and the Second World War and how they'd been portrayed in film and television. And I was lucky to hang out with both of them. And I got a tour of the site. And oh my goodness, it's absolutely brilliant. Well, wonderful, wonderful, incredible place. So much there. Go and visit, folks, if you get the chance. And they're doing some absolutely brilliant stuff up there. I was basically, and they can vouch for this, a kid in a sweet shop. I was just wandering around, gawping at all the aircraft, especially the Bristol Blenheim. But also, you know, they had Wellington there, Handy Page Hampden, and also Short Stirling, parts of. And I'm so excited to have them on today. I learned so much. It was wonderful talking to them. Megan is a historian and academic access manager for the RAF Museum and a published historian whose PhD thesis looked at the commemoration and care of First World War dead buried in the United Kingdom. Rab is an exhibition team member of the RAF Museum and also a historian and currently a student at Wolverhampton University studying his MA there. When I met both of them, as I say, I learned so much. Two absolutely wonderful people. And as I say, they're here with us today. The first question, guys, I don't know who wants to go first. Can you tell us a little bit about your roles at the RAF Museum?
Well, that's quite the introduction. Thank you very much, James. So I'm Rab. I'm a member of the Exhibitions and Interpretations Department. And our role is, working with the different departments in the museum and external groups, is that we create, design, and then eventually set in motion new exhibitions. So one exhibition that we're working on at the moment is a very exciting project, part of the wider Midlands Development Project at Cosford. RAF Museum Midlands. we are totally renovating Hangar 1, and the new exhibition is going to be focusing on RAF history from 1980 to the present day and the future. So we're going to be roughly starting around the Falklands and incorporating drone warfare and Space Command, and it's a very, very cool
fascinating.
That
very
sounds
cool project
great.
at the moment.
Yeah, fantastic. Sounds really brilliant.
Yeah.
Megan?
Hello. I'm Megan. So I'm primarily based at the RAF Museum London, but I'm regularly up at the RAF Museum Midlands. I was actually up there today. So if you saw the tweets when we were getting ready to do this tonight, I mentioned that I'd be at home with a spaniel rather than at home in rural Suffolk. But yeah, so my role as historian and academic access manager at the RAF Museum is all forms of academic access, working with a variety of teams, including the exhibition interpretations team. And my work also includes organising the lecture series, which James has kindly spoken at this year, and I know that Jane spoke at last year. The conference, which I know that both of you are coming to as well.
We'll be there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Our collaborative doctoral award students, tours and all that sort of thing. So lots of different roles, as well as a research role there. So the dream job for post-PhD historian, to be honest.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Sounds absolutely fantastic. God, I'm so envious. That sounds amazing.
Still in a really great dream, and then I'm just going to wake up and...
You are absolutely living the dream. I've got a question now for Rab. Rab, one of the exhibits at the RAF Museum Midlands is a video that explains strategic bombing in the Second World War and also the ethical questions relating to it. Can you tell us how that came about and what the response has been to it? Because obviously that's something which, well, we've sort of explored in earlier episodes, and I know that it's something which comes up again and again, rightly so.
Yeah, sure. So the particular exhibit that you're talking about, it's one part of the wider Bomber Command bomber offensive exhibition we have in Hangar 3 at the Midlands, and we wanted to try and stimulate debate and to try and get people to start thinking more on a more deeper basis of the strategic bombing campaign. I think it's safe to say, whichever side of the argument you fall on, is that the strategic bombing campaign is an extremely controversial and highly emotive subject. As a museum, it's a part of a wider debate in the museum sector about our role in society and how important it is for us to stimulate debate. So when we were designing the whole exhibition from the ground up, we could not ignore the controversial side and the humour aspect, and not just the crews themselves and the wonderful work that they did, but the horrors that they had to endure, etc. We felt it was only right and moral to also include the German experience, but particularly those on the other end of the bombs, so to speak. So we tried to, this particular exhibit, if people haven't seen it, we include in witness statements, testimonies from German civilians, and some of them are, well, all of them are in their own way, very high hitting and can really get you there. We're trying to, again, stimulate that debate on both sides, because there's already quite an emphasis on the bomber crews and the ground crews as well. But again, we're trying to give that 360 view without passing judgment whether it's right or wrong, to hopefully people will start making their own minds up. So, some of the testimonies that we have, yes, they are hard hitting. I actually believe we might have one of the testimonies is similar to the one, or could be the same one that you mentioned on your other episode, James, of Wuppertal, of a mother who was seen wandering ruins with the charred remains of her baby. That's a shocking image. As a parent, even when I was listening and check, because I was checking there was a problem with the audio at the time. I was just checking it, and I had to go and have a sit down. And this is from somebody who's neck deep in my research of all this. And this is the type of discussions that we want people to ideally start thinking about the wider implications of what the campaign actually meant. How we try and find out how successful this is, we leave little cards up on little pegs that people can leave their thoughts.
That's a good idea.
The response on that has been a little bit hit and miss. I would say primarily because I think it's such a deep topic, such an emotive topic that you're still in the exhibition. You just hearing these testimonies. How does anybody, what's the phrase I'm looking for? How do you
make sense of it, I guess?
Make sense of it. How do you express what you're feeling? So while the cards themselves are, like I say, a little bit hit and miss, I personally, from personal experience, know that they do trigger huge debates afterwards. One of my things that I like to do in my job is I like to get out of the office at least once a day, sometimes just have a walk around, sometimes even just to be the 8-year-old in my head again and go look at the Mosquito or go look at the Harrier, because my first ever Airfix kit. But big part of my role is audience engagement and doing research, but also getting feedback on potential displays. And I like to go and observe visitors, sometimes over here, what they've been discussing. Sometimes I even end up giving impromptu lectures that people ask me a question and then I'm still talking at them 15 minutes later. But I often overhear or have spoken to people and some fantastic points that people are making, and especially, and this is when it works, is because we're trying to give this 360-degree look on it, that when people, they stop thinking they're Germans or the British who's under the Blitz, etc., and start thinking that could be my granddad, that could be my mom, etc., etc., and they start that really emotive connection to the people, and that is what the story of the war is. It's all great having all of the kit, all of the shiny, but without the people, that's what we're trying to trigger. So I've been blessed with some fantastic conversations with our visitors.
What sort of age groups do you get in, Rab? So are we talking like from primary school right up to obviously to adults, or
in general in the museum?
Yes,
or we get the full range. We have a lot of schools that do visit. We have vast range, all kinds of diverse backgrounds come in. A lot of time you end up meeting and talking to people. Oh, my Uncle Bill flew on Wellingtons, or but just as often people who don't know their own history, they quite possibly might do. And I think I will try and direct them to your upcoming episode about how to research your relatives in Bomberkind. I'm certainly going to be listening to that myself. But we get such a wide range of experiences, and this is another thing of how we design our exhibitions. We try and employ a layering approach to how we design. So we don't want to assume that there is one typical museum visitor. Lots of different people have, for whatever reason, they're at their particular point of their journey into discovering more of the history. They could either be people like myself, who are very young. I had my Uncle Albert, fantastic name for when you're talking about your relative from the war. But my family's very proud of him. He was a Spitfire pilot with 54 Squadron, and it's a story I heard again and again. So when the first time I saw that Spitfire at Cosford, I did the full stereotypical jaw drop, and I've been hooked ever since. But there are other people who come to it later, and we try and provide a wide range of different ways that works for different people. So we got something for the first timers, people, especially kids who were, or the 30-year-old Jameses when they see the Blenheim for the first time. But
I'm sorry about that. I got far too excited and was just like, oh my goodness, I can go up close to it. And just an incredible aircraft.
But we try and promote the wide range of the different ways that people contributed to the RAF story. So we got the planes, that they're great, but without the people, they're nothing. We have the videos, but we also have a website as well, RAF Stories, which is run by our colleague Jess Boyden Dukes, who does a fantastic job. She and her team have interviewed hundreds of RAF veterans from the interwar period right up to Iraq and Afghanistan, and and she's on it. She's Red Arrows, Harrier pilots, Tornadoes, Mosquito pilots. Her and her team have done fantastic. So if you're ever in need of it, check out our website, RAF Stories. It's always been updated, and I'm a little bit jealous of some of the people that she's got to meet. To be fair, she's just really good at her job.
I think I've seen that before. The RAF Stories one. There's some really brilliant stuff on there. It's really, really good.
I think we're kind of edging towards the next question as well, and I don't know, Megan, if you want to jump in here. Although this is to both of you. Talking about generational shifts and presenting this story, obviously that changes over time, the technology to be able to tell these stories, but also how it's presented. And as things go out of living memory, that's another consideration to think about. What would you say are the biggest challenges when presenting the air war to modern audiences? And what do you think the future looks like in the heritage sector, especially presenting the story of the bombing war?
Yeah, in fact, we were having a discussion about this today when I was up at the Midland site. In another part of the exhibition space, we also have the National Cold War exhibition on that site. And so I was showing someone around there. And like Rab said, we aim to showcase as much of the collection as possible for our visitors to engage with and highlight those human stories in a variety of ways. So that includes, you probably remember these, James, the one-to-one figures of the Bomber Command crew in the Bomber Command exhibition, and audio points to listen to stories in their own words, which I think is really, really powerful. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, memory really evolves over time. And as an academic, and as many people will know, the scholarship's always being updated. So you've got to make sure that you're updating the exhibition space to reflect that, whether that's terminologies and that sort of phrasing and that sort of thing. I think it keeps it relevant to that modern audience. And keeping it engaging. So Rab's mentioning we get a lot of school groups and it could be their first time interacting with this sort of thing. And often they have really limited time in that space. So we have things like a mission interactive game for our younger audiences in particular, which highlight the many different risks that bomber crews encountered on each mission. So it's telling it to them at a level that would be understandable to them without it being too much, arguably. And another challenge that we have is obviously access to objects and airframes that can be used to explore things, particularly in more recent histories, are often still actively in use. And it's that conservation versus engagement that's always going to be a challenge of where you meet that. And, you know, thinking about things like artificial intelligence and that use, more public history and how public viewpoints change and how we engage with them, who our audience is. It's all an interesting challenge, but I think it makes it exciting to be in the heritage sector. You know, again, for example, the National Cold War exhibition space has been there since about 2006, 2007. And when you compare that to somewhere, even the visitor information panels to the Bomber Command exhibition space, which is more recent, you can really see that shift. So if anyone is looking to go into the museum sector, I highly recommend going to these sorts of spaces and seeing those sorts of things and how they've evolved over time. And yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm quite envious also of Rab's job in exhibitions and interpretations, being part of that and front and centre as well.
Do you want to mention anything about the challenges, what you found with this?
Main challenge, I say, is just how do we engage with youngsters? As society's changing, how people, I mean, not just youngsters, the millennials, and we're now becoming the middle-aged. Scary thought, James. It's how people seek out, how people access information is constantly evolving. So it's how we can, first of all, how do we get that first hook with people? How we keep people coming back? How do we? It's all, let's say, with the layers. How do we provide something for everybody? That's one of our biggest challenges. There's also the outside factors as well. So if we're going with Bomber Command at the moment, going by some of the conversations that we have, stuff that's happening in Palestine and Ukraine has been very much on people's forefront. And when it sometimes has come into how people are talking about Bomber Command and the bombing offensive, and when we're seeing such direct, unfiltered footage, especially on social media and whatnot, it gives a newer emphasis on how do you tell that story in its own context as well, and at the same time of putting it next to how it applies to modern times as well. The thing I would say that can be a challenge sometimes, though, is how we can sometimes accidentally or otherwise challenge people's beliefs. So a lot of the time, as you'll know this, James, the myths that have birthed from the Second World War and how much of it is very much part of the modern British foundation, how we the new Britain is, and it can be a challenge as well. That sometimes it's been very rare, but the odd comments where people thinking that we are attacking Bomber Command when we're absolutely that's the last thing that we want wish to do. We're just trying to give the 360 degree.
That's why we're doing this pod. It is we all know the damn busters. Let's talk about the wider story, and that includes the stories on the ground. You've got to have that 360 view to try and make as much sense of it. Not that I believe you really can, but attempt to. You need to look at everything. It's not just bouncing bombs and such. Like there's a lot more to talk about, and it's not just Lancasters, is it, Jane? It's Halifaxes, and
Absolutely not.
And in that
I'm
level.
a big fan of Hamdens now. Yeah,
and Hamdens, yeah.
Well, James got to see a Hamden, didn't you, James? The
so envious.
MBCC.
There's a picture of me grinning with the biggest grin I've ever given in my life, and pointing at it. Yeah.
That was at the time at our Michael Beetham Conservation Centre, which is also at the RAF Museum Midlands. That's separate to the public access site because, of course, it is a conservation space. But that Hamden at some point will eventually be moving down to London. But James got to see it up in the Midlands site. But yeah, and I think it's also interesting as well, just thinking back to, and I'm sure that this is the same for a lot of listeners, but also the people that are on this call. My interest in history came from the museums that I went to, not necessarily from reading books. Obviously, that was also really important. But I was very, very lucky in terms of, in my upbringing, that was what you did on the weekend. You went to these museums or these historic places and that sort of thing. Even now, I find real peace going to these spaces. I'm doing those sorts of things. And so I think it's really lovely to come full circle in that sense as well. Thinking of the next generation of historians who are coming to exhibition spaces and seeing and learning about an area of history that might not necessarily be high priority on the curriculum, or it might not necessarily be something they're as familiar with. And they fall in love with a particular aircraft, as we all do. And, or they fall in love with a particular story, as we all do. And then that kind of translates into the rest of their lives. And that might be even if they don't go into the world of history, but that's that one niche pub quiz topic that they can do as well. And I think that's a really powerful thing to be part of. And I'm so pleased that we get to do that within the RAF Museum and within wider museum spaces. I know, Jane, you were talking about your voluntary work as well. And it's just so nice to be part of that history as well. So I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah. Museums are so important.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Megan, I just want to touch on your PhD thesis now. And in that thesis, you were looking at grief and at death relating to the First World War and Britain and sort of how it was processed and dealt with and commemorated. What are your thoughts on the memory of the air war in Britain, and especially that of Bomber Command in the Second World War, and how we sort of conceptualise our memorials of that campaign?
Well, I was really pleased when I saw this question come in because it's actually my next research project, which is still very much at the beginnings. But it was always something that I was interested in looking at, and then getting the job at the RAF Museum, what better chance to put that into practice? So yeah, I think it's really, really interesting to look at the comparisons between First and Second World War memory more generally. But even the commemoration and care of war dead in the UK, in my thesis, I talk a lot about the family role and private versus public mourning and bereavement, which I know that James's supervisor, Lucy Noakes, Professor Lucy Noakes has written about quite a bit. Yeah. But from the Second World War perspective, it's learning from what happens in the First World War and trying to adapt to it. So, for example, there are 6 RAF regional cemeteries that are set up at Bath, Brookwood, Cambridge, Chester, Harrogate and Oxford, which is a space that's designed to be near the air bases that many of these people are flying from or serving on. And a lot of those are wider international elements, so Canadians and Australians and people like that who might not necessarily have families nearby. And it's really interesting to look at that. And also in particular, one of my favourite places to visit, which is a strange sentence to say about a cemetery, but I'm sure that many people can relate, are places that are both First and Second World War, where they have the Second World War plot, which is a lot more regimented and a lot more familiar to the public. And then you have the First World War scatter graves around that. Again, quite close to the RAF Museum Midland site, you've got Cannock Chase and both the German military cemetery there, but also the British military First World War cemetery. And also other international sites. And I use the term international to talk about the war dead there. So the example that I really got interested in, and I know that Jenny Grant is looking at quite a bit in her PhD research, is the Polish contribution. And having lived the last few years in Nottinghamshire, I got really interested in Newark-upon-Trent Cemetery, where you go into that site and you've got the Second World War plot, which has a large number of Polish war graves, because a lot of Polish service personnel were based there. But then around it, you've got the First World War dead that are almost just as many, but they're in family plots, which is really interesting. But on the flip side, it's also an opportunity for the families to share their grief a bit more. If you look at First World War personal inscriptions, it's about, glory and honour and biblical texts and that sort of thing. Whereas the Second World War ones, if you read them, they're quite emotional. It talks about sons, it talks about daughters, it talks about people left behind a lot more. So I highly recommend looking at that. And if someone can do a PhD comparing the two, that would be great. And then also on the flip side, things like the discovery of remains on archaeological digs, an acknowledgement of the circumstances of their death, I think is really important. So a bit like with tank crews, graves that are buried graves that are placed quite close together. Air accidents, particularly in bomber campaigns, mean that sometimes it's difficult to separate individual remains. And for example, there's someone with 2 burials, one at Brookwood Military Cemetery and one down in Sittingbourne in Kent, because of these later archaeological digs. And then also just to highlight, in the UK perspective, there's so many accidents. And I always like to, when I'm giving presentations and talks about my research, highlight that ultimately these people that we're looking at and remembering are quite young people. I mean, they're certainly younger than me now, with powerful machines at their disposal. And so waving at a loved one, going, "Hi, mum," and then sadly crashing and things like that. We've got to remember that context as well. So I think it's that sensitivity when we are looking at memorialisation. And as we sort of mentioned as well, Bomber Command is a tricky subject to untangle the memory of. Our exhibition spaces hope to explore that and consider it in future research projects. But I think it's really interesting looking at how the memory of air war has very much evolved over time. And how we continue to honour that memory. But I tend to focus on the very micro scale about the individuals rather than the more macro scale.
Something that's just come to mind actually is when I went to London recently, I took Ethan to the Bomber Command Memorial in Green Park. And I was looking at it and I told about the story that, it was built in 2012 after a campaign and fundraising and such like. And I said, can I just have a minute to sit down? Because it's an incredibly moving place. And while we were there in the space of about, 15, 20 minutes, there were half a dozen people that had stopped, looked. Some people were taking photographs. And this was like a Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't even a particularly, it wasn't a Sunday or anything. And it really dawned on me, and Ethan said this as well, just how important this memorial was, and also how important memorials are. And we looked, and there were people that had laid down photographs and messages to their grandfather or whoever the relation was. And it, as I say, really dawned on you how important memorials are. It's incredible.
It is. And that's what I find. I think my research will never end. And I think so many people who study that area, again, everyone on this podcast will say the same. You go past these memorials and sometimes you ignore them, not proactively, but in the sense of you're going to get your loaf of bread, so you walk past your local war memorial and that sort of thing. But then stopping and looking up is something that I'm trying to be really conscious of. So I love doing memorial spotting and visiting local cemeteries to see who's there, and then sharing that with people on social media, because my social media space is full of like-minded people who don't mind having a cemetery picture. And it's really nice to then hear from other researchers to find out a bit more about those people, or perhaps connect people with relatives that they may not have been aware of. And so I think it's a really rewarding thing to do, to look at these memorials and remember the names. And I'm always struck by something that Olivia Smith told me, who was an MRes student with Professor Lucy Noakes as well, where she talked about, and I don't think she was the person that said this, but it was a phrase that had stuck with me, was about having two deaths. One is your physical death, and then the second is the last time your name is uttered. And so for me, a lot of the memory and memorialization is about making sure that their memory lives on. So going and touching the names on a war memorial, especially when you learn these stories and they become part of your research, it's about honouring them. So I like to talk to them, and particularly when we're talking to younger people as well, you don't necessarily want to go into the gory details of a circumstance of how that person came to be on a memorial, but just say hello to Dave or whoever, and they go, hi Dave, because they're 5 or whatever. It's quite nice, because then they'll remember
That's
that.
lovely.
And that's
absolutely
why
lovely.
I love even these memorials without names. You're then thinking about people you may have heard about, and, you know, like Rab was saying about, you know, it was your uncle, wasn't it, Rab? Yeah. Your uncle. I've got medals at home for great uncles that I'm never going to meet and would never have met anyway, but I know their names. And I like to talk about them. And I'm very lucky that I've got a very supportive family who let me put up those pictures in our house to look at and continue that service family tradition, which is really lovely as well.
Yeah, I've got my granddad's medals on the wall. I never met him, and I look at them every now and again. And there's the Africa Star there, and I just do a little moment randomly, to be honest. But yeah. Well, this is an incredible chat.
You never, sorry, just to cut across, but you never know when it's going to hit you as well. You know, we go day
absolutely,
in, day out.
Very true.
With these discussions of memorialization, you know, you can walk past something 100 times and then you stop, or you tell a story 100 times and then you actually listen to what you're saying because you're sort of on a rote story. You go, oh my goodness, this is quite a story. I need a minute, you know, to go for a walk and think about it. Like Rab was saying with some of our audio histories, you might have listened to it 100 times to make sure the audio's right, but then you actually re-listen to it and listen to that story. And again, just to shout out the RAF Stories portal again, that was one of the things that I got shown when I first started. And there is a particular story that sticks in my head of a Harrier pilot who I can't remember what illness they later had, but the video was just incredible to watch and listen to. So yeah, it's definitely something to think about as well.
Yeah. I think that kind of comes to our next question. I don't know, Brad, you want to go first and then Megan, but do you have a favourite object or aircraft on display at the museum?
Oh, that's a mildly evil question, James.
You can tell I wrote it, didn't you?
It's like asking which is your favourite child.
I was just going to say that, and I don't even have children.
If I'm being absolutely honest, a lot of it will depend on my mood on the particular day, or if yet another rabbit hole that I've been falling down in my MA, and I want to find out more about particular aircraft. If I go strictly about aircraft, I am actually really fond of our Balsam Pull Defiant.
Good shout. Yeah,
I know it's got a bad rap, etc., but I think it's a nice looking plane. It's the only one in the world in good nick, and we have that. And I'll always defend it because it's a local boy like me. It's from Wolverhampton, and who doesn't like an underdog? So it's a double whammy for me, and it's all black. It looks cool.
It does, yeah.
And it's yeah. But other than the kit, as I was saying earlier, ultimately these planes, without the stories, they're just metal and canvas and cable and oil. In Hangar 1, on the mezzanine, we have a little exhibition about POWs, and it follows the story of Jim Chapman, Flight Sergeant Jim Chapman. He's a local lad. He's just from down the road from the museum, from Willenhall. And he was a Lancaster gunner, and he took part in a raid on Stuttgart, I believe it was, and he was shot down. Him and his crew shot down in February 44. In this exhibit, you can plot his story from very start of his sergeant's mess card, and I start thinking of having to pay your dues, and you get your card, etc. Right up to the letter that his mother was sent saying, "We are sorry to inform you, but your son, Flight Sergeant, etc., etc., was shot down and is presumed missing action, killed, and presumed killed." And again, I'm a father of a 9-year-old, and I don't need any help from reading that to put myself in that position of thinking. The question is, what would I feel like if I got that about John, my son? Didn't have to. I was there in the moment, thinking I could be sat at my kitchen table and reading that, and I could feel that wave that his mother was probably feeling. Just even though these small exhibits are very, 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 very powerful. Going on with Jim, he carries on. There's a later letter, and it did make me smile, from one of his officers to his wife saying, "Yes, we can confirm that your husband is still missing in action. We will continue his allowance to you for 17 weeks, which may be extended by 9 weeks at our discretion." And that just made me smile, in the sense of thinking, you guys know, you guys have spoken to a lot more veterans than I have. Time and time again, they say, "We were just doing a job." These are ordinary people, me, like you, like us, born in extraordinary times, doing extraordinary things. And yet at the same time, but doing these extraordinary things in the air, the practical side of that is so much mundane minutiae, the petty bureaucracy of that second letter about talking about someone's wages and whatnot. It just really struck me. We've all, I think, whatever jobs we've all been in, we've all had to deal with paperwork and that bureaucracy. And again, that takes me into that place as well. From the emotive, took the letter to his mother, right up to that petty bureaucracy, so to speak. But if we keep going with that particular exhibit, a little bit of happiness to this chap. He actually did survive. He was captured, and he was one of the letters later on is a letter back to his mother saying, "Yep, we've confirmed for the Red Cross he is a prisoner of war."
Wonderful.
He was taken to Stalag Luft 6, and another amazing artifact that we have, which it bamboozles me, because I look at it and think, would I have done this as well? At this particular camp, and I'm not saying, I don't know exactly if this is the only camp it happened, there's a brochure that was handed around to the POWs, a camp university. And there's a list of different guys in there, and they do different lectures. So Flight Lieutenant James Jeffries can do a course on history, there's one for accountancy, one for economics, as good, almost as good as a normal university brochure. And that made me smile. They're not letting themselves, wouldn't let themselves get down. It's actually a really well presented, well printed, lovely artifact. And all these different items. This is the story of this particular chap, from the really emotive, horrible, could he have been killed? And unfortunately, as we know, more than half of bomber crew didn't survive the war, up to the more happier, given he's in a POW camp. But that human spirit feel very, very strong, and I would hope that I would have that inner strength to buck myself up and carry on. Again, all these artifacts, I go straight into their shoes, and I think they're wonderful. And I will stop in a moment. But the very last thing is, I'm not sure when the photo was taken. I'm guessing around late 80s, early 90s, going by the quality of the picture. But there's a picture of Jim visiting the museum. and he looks like he's giving a talk. So it's just a nice bookend from
wonderful. Oh,
him.
that's so lovely.
Very much, he starts with his sergeant's mess card, right up to. Again, there's no, I'll have to look into that one more deeply, but he looks like he's in his 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and he's giving a talk at the museum. And it's just, and then I go back and look at our Lincoln or Mosquito, the Spitfire, and just go, wow, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I think, what could I have done that?
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
Sorry for that rabbit hole.
No, there's something I've asked
fantastic,
myself many times. Yeah. You just don't know. Megan, same question. Favourite objects, aircraft?
Well, I know we say never mind the dam busters, but I've got to highlight that we have Wing Commander Guy Gibson's medals on display in the Bomber Command exhibition space. They're not my favourite item, but I just want to highlight it's a special mention, and I promise I won't mention the D word going forward. But I think there's so many different things, and it changes day to day in terms of my favourite thing that's on display in both of our sites. And you'll hear me going on about my latest interesting fact if you're in the office at any given moment. So I've gone down rabbit holes, as people have probably seen, of the RAF Comforts Committee. And so in display in Hangar 1 at our London site, we have a balaclava that was hand knitted as part of the RAF Comforts Committee. And so learning about that was really interesting to me. I'm also a knitter, so maybe one day I'll try and recreate that. But for today, just because I've spent so long in the National Cold War exhibition space at the RAF Museum Midlands site today, I'm going to mention the V bombers, and I'm not going to name which one's my favourite because we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. But I live on an RAF base now, which really brings home the importance of displaying these items. So I get to go past the Gate Guardian every day of our RAF station that we live at. And it's amazing to know that history. And then I go to the museum and that same aircraft is on display. And then not the exact same one, obviously, same type. And then I get to hear interesting facts about the ones at the museum and then go home and tell whoever wants to listen. But the V bombers for me are important because when we lived in Nottingham, being so close to Lincolnshire, we had so many people who served in the RAF. So my next door neighbour, who sadly passed away earlier this year, was a Coastal Command Lancaster pilot. And he was awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross after the war for some of his service. I think it was in the Asia sort of area, but I'll have to double check that. But one of the chaps that used to go to our local RAF association meetings, he's still alive, was a Victor pilot. And the reason why I talk about the V-bombers is obviously the Vulcan's incredible. I remember seeing it at Biggin Hill Air Show when I was like 14, and the Typhoon was taking off and set off all the car alarms, and it was amazing to see that. And then it was like the Vulcan display team went, "Hold my beer." They shut the other side of the road, and I believe someone told me they melted the runway that year, but I don't know whether that was true or not. But to see that, it's menacing, the V-Force. But this very small gentleman who loves to play tennis, wouldn't say boo to a goose, literally gave a talk to us about his time as a Victor pilot. He was so fascinating. He was talking about, he was 24, newly married, new on squadron, and it was the early 60s, so around the Cuban Missile Crisis era. And he said, your role, you knew that when you were on the quick reaction alert was you'd drop your load, you'd fly about until you run out of fuel, you try and land somewhere safely, and then ... We don't know what happens at that point. And again, going back to this conversation just now about being in people's shoes, and there's hundreds of stories like this. But hearing that from him, looking at him now, I wouldn't have registered it, as silly as it sounds, because you're seeing them as they are now, because you didn't know them then. And thinking, 24 years old, newly married, all of this other stuff, to make these big decisions and be part of such a big element of things is so interesting. And that's what I love about, again, just to keep going on about, I love working in museums. You get these large objects, or you get these objects on display, but you get to tell these stories as well. So today I'm going to go for the V-Force and shout out to John if he's listening. He is very tech savvy as well. So I'll send this to him afterwards when it's live, for inspiring me to pick the V-Bombers today.
It's very much been an honour. I think Megan very much agreeing with here of working at the museum, and we have the museum has the latest count just over 1.3 million different items.
Wow.
Of which, give or take, I think about only 270 of those are the aircraft. We have such a wide range. I mean, ask me that question tomorrow, ask me that question on Monday, it could be totally different. I will say one thing. Part of the Midlands Development Project up at Cosford is, as long with Hangar One's redevelopment, we're going to be opening a brand new custom-built, fit-for-purpose collections hub. Big warehouse where we're storing all of our most of our collections, of which we are planning to hopefully have tours so people can come and see some of the items that we can't always have under space for purely practical reasons. I'll give one final object which always makes me laugh. I haven't seen them myself and I hope to one day, but we actually are in possession of Douglas Bader's legs. Which every time I get reminded that, I don't know why it makes me chuckle so much, but it never fails to. So that, along with lots of other awesome things. So again, evil question, James. Thank you for it.
You know me so well, but that's absolutely fascinating. I think we do have to wrap up just looking at the time. But wow, that was absolutely fascinating. Didn't I say they were going to be brilliant?
You did, yeah, and they have been
brilliant.
Absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely.
We could talk for about 4 hours, I think, this evening, but yeah.
Well, they've got to come back. I honestly could listen to you for absolutely hours. This is why I wanted them. I went to RAF Museum Midlands, got chatting to you both, and there's just so much to learn, so much to discuss. But so yeah, a massive thank you, Megan, Rab, for coming onto the pod. It's been brilliant. Again, folks, do go to the museum. It is absolutely brilliant. It's fantastic. There is so much there to see. We've barely scratched the surface talking about what's there today. So over to Jane, I think, to wrap things up.
Thanks, James, and thank you so much, Megan and Rob. That was absolutely fantastic. In our next episode, which will be released on 31st of July, we have something a little different for you. One of the questions I'm asked most frequently, and I know, James, you get asked this a lot too, is how to go about researching an ancestor who served with Bomber Command, or how to research a particular crew. So James and I are going to be explaining in quite some detail how you can access this information. We're going to be discussing service records, squadron associations, casualty files, using the National Archives, and all sorts of other information. We'll include all the relevant links in the show notes to accompany the episode too, so that's a good point of reference for you. This will also be the first episode we record with an audience made up of some of our paid subscribers. So it's going to operate a little like a live stream, so audience members will be able to ask questions and make comments. We hope to make this a regular feature too. If you'd like to get involved, you can subscribe at nevermindthedambusters.buzzsprout.com from just £2.50 a month. Thank you all so much for listening. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a review or rating wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help. And we'll see you again next time. Thank you. Bye.